John Spencer, it's so good to see you today. You've got a lot of experience in this field. You are the chair of urban warfare studies at the Modern Warfare Institute at West Point. And you obviously know very well what is occurring today in Ukraine, what is occurring in Israel, about what's about to happen in Gaza. How do you see the situation? How would you compare and contrast the situation in Ukraine from Israel?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I'm not taking a side. I'm an objective analyst, and both sides, in accordance with international law. So Israel and Hamas, who is the elected governments, have the requirement in the laws of war to take all means feasible to reduce the harm to civilian populations and infrastructure. Israel has implemented many of the steps that even Western countries don't do, like calling a building before they strike it, like, hey, this is a military target. You need to get out of it. Dropping ammunition on top of the building before it's struck. Unlike what we've seen in places like Kramatorsk, where Russia targets civilians trying to flee the area on purpose. Israel is implementing multiple precautions, call outs, dropping flyers, telling the civilians exactly where to go before the war starts. So actually reducing and taking more risk on themselves to do that requirement in war, especially after World War II, where to reduce as much as feasible, although it's, there's never zero. There's never a battlefield in urban space where it's a good guy, bad guy, army versus army. Even when you, in history, surround the city, wait months for the civilian population to come out, there's still about 10%, which 10% of a million is still a lot of civilians left in the environment. But you're required to. And Israel, I see Israel doing it, despite the calls for ceasefire, despite the false claims of war crimes. And again, it's not my decision. It's based on the facts. Israel is showing what it looks like to follow the law of war in a war, especially a defensive war, to prevent an enemy from killing their own civilians. So it's a lot of actual restraint. And this is why urban warfare is so hard, because by the nature of the law of war, once you enter urban terrain, which is unrealistic, kind of like the false claims of Amnesty International, who said Ukraine was violating the laws of war by being in the urban areas, which is a lie, not true. It's illegal to, like Hamas does with human shields, to put your military targets intermixed with the civilian population in protected sites on purpose to restrict the use of force that can be used against you. It's called lawfare. So, but when anybody enters that follows the law of war, enters an urban area, they already have to restrict their use of force, despite like we're seeing right now, Israel targeting, bombing before you get there, all the military targets that you know of, which is very, very historical, to include the United States for weeks, would bombed Baghdad and other military sites in urban areas of Iraq, so that the people that you're sending forward to clear those areas have less enemy to deal with. The enemy can't see, can't communicate. This is really, I think, it's awful. And I know both sides. So Hamas has legal obligations as well to protect civilians. So not putting your military headquarters underneath the hospital, not putting your weapons supplies in churches, not using humans as shields and telling that you can't evacuate even if you want to. I'm ordering you to stay here. Those are all very clear war crimes. Both sides have the obligation. We've seen awful things that Russia has done to violate the law of war and commit war crimes on a daily basis, like indiscriminately bombing urban areas for the purpose of targeting civilians, not for the purpose of military targets. This is really duality of war is destructive. It's going to look like the ground was raised in Gaza, and people are claiming already indiscriminate bombing. They're providing some casualty ratings without distinguishing between civilian and military casualties. It's a narrative battle, like Ukraine has had to learn. This is a fight about the will and the narrative of just war, of following the laws of war, accountability, and all those factors.
So when a country such as, for instance, Israel goes in somewhere like Gaza, what does they have to be looked out for? Why is it that there's always such high losses in urban warfare? What sets it apart from other types of warfare?
And one of the reasons, and again, I can give any historical example, but Ukraine provides multiple examples that in the urban area it's inherently defendable. The concrete buildings, the thousands of apertures, the subterranean spaces allows a weaker force to take away the advantages of a bigger, more modern, more powerful force. Because in the three-dimensional urban aspect, it's so hard for the attacker to use its technologies. Attackers want to engage the enemy as far away as possible. They want to see them long before their forces interact with them. They want to use their aerial surveillance, aerial strike, artillery, mortars, all that to do to destroy the enemy, which is usually the goal in wars, but it also can be to liberate and be terrain based. In the urban environment, we call that combat in hell because of those factors. The fact that you have to restrict your force. You can't just know where the enemy is and then level a city block. You have to follow the laws of war. You have to use proportionality. You have to discriminate between a combatant and a non-combatant in an urban environment, which all make it harder and harder, not just to know that the enemy can come from literally 360 degrees around you, above you, and below you. And it's so easy for the defender to create spaces where they can move between buildings and never be seen, attack when they want. So many advantages that the defender has, and why this type of warfare is so hard. Plus, again, good soldiers, want to protect civilians. So you'll see Israeli defense forces having to assist while they're fighting Hamas terrorist militants, trying to assist civilians to get out of harm's way, like we saw in Ukraine, where Ukrainian's military had to apply resources to actually getting their own civilians out of harm's way, because that's what a professional military with an ethical framework that follows the law of war does.
So, I get this impression, though, there's a big difference here, is that Russia seems like time's on its side. It's not rushing. Whereas I see the Israelis, it's like they're under a pressure cooker. They got to move fast. You detect that too? Why is that?
Absolutely. I mean, war is a contest of will, and Israel, since its sovereign borders were established as a nation, has had to fight wars under a ticking time clock before external international allies, other nations come in and say, look, I know there's a war going on, but we need to cease fire. We need to seek a peace agreement. Even in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, where Israel was attacked by 5 nations, they were on a time clock before, and usually the United States being the biggest factor in that, the international community says, look, the damage is too much. You've got to cease fire. So in this case, although everybody recognizes that Israel has the right, and really, I, as a military analyst, there's very few alternatives on the table besides a complete Hamas surrender and disarmament to accomplish the mission of protecting their nation and their citizens from an attack like this. Their version, the worst death toll that they've ever experienced since the Holocaust, their 9/11, without going in to do that, but it will be under a clock. It's already, people can feel the clock as all these different populations and political governments are saying, you really shouldn't go in. You should really, we should cease fire before the missions even started. Although of course, the air campaign to reduce military capability has started. Israel always fights that. And that's actually unique to urban battles. The 2017 Battle of Mosul, which I think is one of the most closely analogous battles to what I think will happen in the cities of Gaza, took 9 months to pry 3,000 to 4,000 ISIS fighters out of a city of 1.4 million because of all the tactical warfighting challenges of urban areas, but also this political aspect of it. Unlike open terrain, now you have the civilian casualties, the cost to the actual city, and all these international actors with different responsibilities and different thoughts about what should happen step in and say, Israel, you have to stop. So the clock is ticking, which rushes the operation, right? So this usually you have a lot more time to prepare the operation, to prepare your plans and bring together the resources you need. In this case, plus, and unique in this situation is 200 hostages, civilian hostages, again, war crime, from multiple different nations, with the complexity of, if you launch, if you wait longer, the will, although Israel doesn't need the will to do the operation, it does, the international community does have implications to how long the operation can continue forward. The hostages add to that variable. The longer you wait, possibly the more loss of hostages while you negotiate. The faster you go, the chance that, and they will, since Hamas, like Hamas is the case study I use to teach urban warfare as to people that use human shields, where they'll purposely put their people and want their people to die to achieve their strategy of causing this greater like Arab revolt, and all these people to rise up against Israel for them by showing all these false narratives of war crimes and all this, when both sides have their responsibility. But time is huge to Israel.
That's fascinating. I really appreciate your time today, Major Spencer.
Thanks, Jason.